What are the obstacles that are keeping these children from coming to school?
We had 2 students who hadn't been registered for school for 5 years.
Kids were nothing more than pawns in a giant game of power. Nothing was happening. Nothing was moving.
Because these children just need someplace safe to go, and there is not enough. And how that is going to change, I pray I get to see it.
So we were given data from a reliable source stating that one school had registered 350 students, and a few months into the semester, they were down to less than 100 students in attendance. I had the opportunity to tour through that school. I didn't see 30 students in attendance. It had a dystopian feel to it. Literally a 71% absenteeism rate. I was stunned, I was shocked, I knew it was bad, but I did not know it was this bad. So Inner City Youth Alive isn't really an educational institute, but we were starting to notice something was off in the community. We just noticed so many kids walking around in the middle of the day. We'd often do a home visit, check in on parents, and we'd find that kids were still there. And so it just something twigged for us, and we said something is off.
So I was just starting grade 9, then I was just going to class, and so after a few minutes, I was called to the office and they told me I couldn't go to school. I really suspected they lost my file, so I just upped and left the school.
The barriers, I would say, are a lot of the time it's just family life. Family life will get you like it's nothing, especially if it's problematic and you're young and you don't know how to handle it yourself and there's no one else there that can tell you how to handle it because they themselves don't know how to as well.
Well, since I wasn't really in school for 2 years, I just really did stuff around the house, helped around. I really just slept all day, which kind of ruined my sleep schedule. And so, yeah, that's all I really did. After I dropped out, mainly everyone was bugging me to go back. And so I wanted to listen, but I also just didn't want to be dropped out of another school just for like a lost file.
And for the school itself, it's not that bad. It does make me happy coming here, being able to finish work. Like there's that moment of fulfillment and accomplishment that I did something that I wanted to do, that I'm supposed to do. But when I get home, there's that personal stuff that comes at me that makes me no longer want to do things that I'm supposed to do. And I just want to sleep.
I feel that children these days, they just want to feel safe. They want to feel secure, loved, wanted. And it seems that children are just pushed to the side. And ultimately, when you keep doing that, they're going to go somewhere where they feel wanted. And that's another reason why resources are so crucial, because these children just need someplace safe to go. And there is not enough. I do feel that the smaller schools, elementary, junior high, they do seem more focused on the kids wanting to reach out, phone calls, emails, knocking on the door just to say, hey, how's it going? And that has been very heartwarming to see. I do find, though, that in the bigger schools, there is next to none, maybe just emails. Sometimes a phone call from a robot, which is very annoying, but it falls on us, period. Somewhere down the line, something wasn't done. Someone didn't dot the I's, cross the T's, whatever it is, but there is a big, big disconnect between our children and the schools. There's no reason that children shouldn't love going somewhere where they can learn. Why has learning become a negative word? I don't understand that. And we need that love for our children to be felt. and heard. The second you walk in the door, you should feel like you belong. And that is not happening at all. And it angers me beyond reason.
Stories like these have taken place over many years and continue today. The issue is complex and shaped by many contributing factors. But at its heart, it's about the children, their education, and ultimately, their hope for a better future. How could we have lost touch with so many of our own young people?
Well, when it comes to Indigenous peoples, again, it goes against generations of our peoples and our cultures where we learned with our families, we learned within our communities, within our tribes. It was much more hands-on, it was much more mentoring, much more showing. This seems very detached where the kids have to, leave the home, go to, some school, sometimes with hundreds or thousands of others, learn subjects that they may not see the value of or see the importance of. It's not a very communal way of doing things. It's very different than our traditional ways. So it's not surprising that our young people don't see the value of it, especially when you think of the fact that for generations, schools meant being abducted, being taken away from our communities, being taken away from our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, and it meant being raped, tortured, used as medical guinea pigs, deep harm and deep trauma. So those things were called residential schools. So it's not surprising these days when you hear young people say, well, why would I want to go to school? Even if it is different, it's not something to be trusted.
In every one of those Indigenous communities, there's a connection, some connection to the legacy of residential schools. And so that legacy sits there, and it goes from generation to generation and generation. And we as colonists, settlers, would say that we need to work through that. But we have a habit of seeing it as their legacy, Indigenous legacy. And we don't assume enough responsibility that it is our legacy. That's what truth and reconciliation is. And so we need to work at that together. The fact that we ask Indigenous children to come to a colonial school system is still a bit of a problem. We need to be more creative, and we need to resolve that. We need to fix that. We need to think differently. And we need to really understand what it was like for different cultures to educate their children. And then we need to educate them in that manner.
Before we move forward, it may be helpful to define what we mean by absenteeism, as it is central to this discussion.
So there are 3 categories of absenteeism. So we have chronic absenteeism, where students are missing at least 10 days in an instructional period. These students are generally pretty easy to reach if staff members or family members are able to address the issue early on. Then there's severe chronic absenteeism, which is when a student misses at least 20 days or more in an instructional period. So then there's this 3rd category of students who are unregistered from school or completely disengaged from the classroom. And so these are students who haven't been to school in 1 or 3 years. And even in the most extreme cases that we had 2 students who hadn't gone to school or hadn't been registered for school for 5 years. And so this is generally a group of students that is unaccounted for, and it's hard to track how wide or how big the group is.
Winnipeg School Division is the old city of Winnipeg, from the north end to the south end, to the west end, east to Elmwood. The real challenges around absenteeism are in the inner city north end. That's the area that has the highest crime rate anywhere in Canada, and that's the area that has some of the highest poverty rates in Canada. We moved back to North Point Douglas, my late wife Chris and I, in 2006. And one of the things we noticed right away was there's always kids, school-age kids, wandering around the streets, walking by our house. We'd chat to them. Why aren't you going to school? Oh, well, we moved, and I just don't bother, etc. So we realized that this was a major problem, because if kids weren't getting an education, they were going to have a difficult time in life. So I set out to do some research, and I started asking people, I talked to the principal at the school, very cooperative. I got all the stats for North Point Douglas, Norquay School. But I couldn't get any overall stats and talk to people. So I'm a sneaky guy. I phoned the administration one day and I just asked the clerk if I could get some stats on school absenteeism. What's the absenteeism rate at Calvin and in St. John's High School? I picked, one of the richest neighborhoods and one of the poorer neighborhoods that had roughly the same population.
What Cell discovered was that on September 30th, 2015, there were 38 students at Calvin High School and 115 students at St. John's High School who had recorded 4 or more absences. By the end of the school year, Calvin remained at 38, while St. John's had risen up to 161.
Until I got those statistics, I had a very difficult time getting anybody interested in the issue of absenteeism. As soon as I had those numbers, the difference between Calvin and St. John's, I was able to get the attention of people in the school division and politicians. It crept up on people. It was just a few kids were missing school, then a few more, then a few more. And by the time it got to this crisis point where there's such a significant number of kids missing, then people didn't know what to do. And they still don't know what to do.
As this data came to light, public interest in the issue grew. Many local media outlets reported on the story, and both Cell and Kent were approached for interviews and commentary. The attention underscored how deeply the issue resonated with the public.
And there was so much gathering energy. So it looked like the wider public had a deep interest in addressing this problem. And so it really looked promising at the beginning. But there was a really strange sort of resistance from Winnipeg One trustees. And one trustee actually took me aside in one of the presentations that we were doing. There was, the media was all present and was very angry with me and let me know that I was making her job very difficult as a trustee, to which I said, not nearly as difficult as it is for these kids that don't graduate because you're sitting on your hands. So that was kind of opposition I didn't expect.
In May of 2017, Cell and Kent were invited to present their concerns to the trustees of the Winnipeg School Division. According to the public minutes from the May 15, 2017 meeting, the trustees expressed skepticism about the presentations, stating that they lacked a basic understanding of the Winnipeg School Division and its programs, and that many of the thoughts and recommendations from those presentations were problematic and troublesome. This response underscored a deeper issue, that the concerns being raised pointed to a larger challenge within the system, one that, if acknowledged, would require more open and urgent conversation about how to best support students who were disengaged. At the time, Winnipeg School Division cited a division-wide absenteeism rate of 6.7%. Critics argued that this figure did not reflect significant disparities in attendance across specific schools where chronic absenteeism was more concentrated. While there was widespread public acknowledgement of the issue, efforts to elevate it appeared to face resistance behind the scenes.
We were actually a little innocent to the gravity of what we were exposing. And what sort of started to bring things into stark focus is an individual who took me out for lunch for the sole purpose of warning me that I was making very powerful people angry. And so at this point, I started to realize the gravity of the situation. So I started to realize that we had maybe kicked a wasp's nest, something that was bigger, and the weight of what we'd actually done is starting to hit home.
You know, I started working with ministers of education an awful long time ago. I realized that this wasn't an individual school issue. This was a province-wide issue that we needed decision-making and effort at the top. I've now talked to 8 ministers of education, 4 of them New Democrats and 4 of them Conservatives, and every one of them cared. Every one of them cared about absenteeism, and none of them did anything effective. All of them wanted to fix the schools, make the schools better. And as soon as it became real that the issue was chronic absenteeism, roots are in the home, they all backed off. And as a result, in these 17 years I've been working on the issue, we really haven't had any effective action 40,000 kids in Manitoba are not getting an education. The United Nations Declaration of Children's Rights says that every child has the right to an education. So Manitoba is breaching the United Nations Declaration on Children's Rights.
In response, Sell and Kent advocated for the formation of a provincial task force on absenteeism. With growing media and public attention, the Manitoba government launched the task force in June 2017, bringing together educators, community leaders, and government representatives to address the problem.
During my time on the task force, I was happy to see that it was getting the attention of a lot of school superintendents around the province, from provincial officials themselves, people from the Department of Education. A lot of people were seeing the problem, and a lot of people were being exposed to the problem of low attendance. And so everybody very quickly agreed that this was a problem and that something needed to be done. I was a little unsure, and I was seeing a little slow uptake in how that would be done, and resources and people power invested towards it. And I had to be patient, understanding that government don't always move that quickly.
Being on the task force left me kind of excited and disappointed all at the same time. Let me say that. Excited in the sense that we talked a lot about the issues that affected the absenteeism, the fact that we had more than just education people around the table. We work in separate silos too much in departments, and when it comes to children, we need to be able to collaborate very quickly and very efficiently so that we can share the information that we have. There was a reluctancy for people to be at the table because it took time out of their busy schedule. Generally, we felt that this was interference into the job that we were really paid to do or hired to do. And so that in itself already kicked at the legs underneath this whole thing. The idea was great. There wasn't enough funding. There wasn't a strong enough commitment.
According to Sell and Kent, communication between the task force and the Winnipeg School Division lacked transparency. In a local interview, Kent commented that the Winnipeg School Division representatives attended only one of 3 meetings, a detail which raised concerns about engagement. Observers began to question the level of institutional commitment. One might expect that with greater visibility of the issue, decision-makers would act decisively in the best interest of students. Yet progress stalled.
So we were about 3 years into this project, and I started to realize that we were just not making progress. There was no traction. Nothing was moving. Nobody was willing to act. And I came to the point where I said to one of the members of government who'd been tasked to work on this, I told them that I was convinced that the kids were nothing more than pawns in a giant game of power. Nothing was happening. Nothing was moving.
Under the Conservative government at the time, a consulting firm was hired to produce a research report, and a marketing agency was engaged to help shape messaging around the issue prior to an election. Together, these efforts amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet ultimately resulted in little meaningful action on the ground. Considerable staff time and public resources were also invested in meetings and internal discussions, with few concrete outcomes to show for it. Later, under the NDP government, the task force was disbanded. While some directives were issued to school superintendents, the broader initiative lost momentum.
So, serving on that provincial task force to address this issue of absenteeism, I assumed we'd see data. I assumed we'd be able to see what was actually happening in real time in schools. As much as we begged, as much as we pled for this data piece that we thought was vital to our work, never once did I see actual data from attendance in schools in our community.
At this stage in the process, we offer a necessary disclaimer. Due to restricted access to school-specific attendance data, some of the insights presented here rely on testimony from educators, parents, students, and community members. This information is difficult to independently confirm or disprove.
Any given time, we would probably be operating with 60% of our kids in attendance, which is typical. Like if you look at some of the high schools too in that area, if they have half their kids there, then that's a good day. So it's shocking. You almost feel to a certain degree some responsibility to that, because you're thinking like, we had them. You can start to build that relationship and then it just keeps falling off, and it can be really discouraging and you can feel hopeless. How much of our resources are we spending then trying to get those kids in. And then if we're doing that, what is that taking away from when our job is to be teachers? And so if we're getting into the community where that's where we see the most impact, if we're doing that, then we're not doing something else. Like, what if what we do can make a difference for just a handful of kids? And you hear stories of a kid who says, oh, this teacher for this principal or this, and that could change their whole life. And so if what we do can give them an opportunity to see a different future for themselves and then for their kids, but you need great people in the North End because they need a champion for them. They need advocates. They need people who are fighting for their rights and their justice.
We began to explore what practical, innovative approaches might address this problem. What could be done to respond in ways that are meaningful and measurable?
So we were given data from a reliable source stating that one school had registered 350 students, and a few months into the semester, they were down to less than 100 students in attendance. I had the opportunity to tour through that school. I didn't see 30 students in attendance. It had a dystopian feel to it. Being a big believer in education, it was just such a gut punch to see this. And I actually see it on the faces of the staff as well. Well-intentioned staff who had a heart to want to teach kids, and there was just not students present. So I'm sure it's taking an incredible toll on staff who have the well-being of kids in mind.
A central question emerged. Why wasn't there more transparency or urgency from provincial officials and school trustees?
The way that we offer education is the way that we've offered it almost 100 years ago. We have classes, we have schedules, we have curriculum. Education doesn't like risks. We're so afraid of doing something and having it wrong. Our job is to educate children. We need to figure out a way to do that. That's positive, unique, wholesome, and kids have success, and kids enjoy it. That's our job. It's as simple as that. Our job is not to create a beautiful schedule. And multi-age classrooms are here. Multi-skill classrooms are here. There is no such thing as grade 7 students all being grade 7 students and moving through the curriculum in a nice, easy manner with everybody catching on at the same pace. That's gone. Perhaps it was never here, but now we're really aware of it. So I think we need to think a little bit differently in the school about how we do that, because that's our colonial system. Everybody marches along at the same speed, and it doesn't work. I would love it that children could come into the gym, and on the gym was every outcome they needed to know. And when every single outcome was pulled off the wall, they'd get their grade 12. What I'm really saying is that you march at your own pace and you learn at your own speed. And we have a tendency to leave kids behind.
The people in the education system are not bad people. Everyone I've talked to cares. Part of the problem we have is some schools are faced with a significant number of kids who aren't there, and they don't know what to do. And that's because teachers are trained to be teachers. What we desperately need is people who are skilled and able to go into the homes, who can relate to the families and encourage, support, and in whatever way necessary, get those kids going to school. And one of the things that just frustrates me no end is the school divisions don't even have a record, a registry of those children who are chronically absent the year before. They should have an absolute registry of who's chronically absent the year before, and the minute that child is missing, resources have to be invested in getting that child to school.
When public systems fall short, financial structures often reveal underlying challenges. Government and school officials acknowledged the issue, yet cited funding constraints. While positions were created to address absenteeism, measurable progress remained elusive. This raised the question, might there be funds within the existing system to redirect towards solutions?
The funding model is pretty simple, and over the course of time has become really complicated. We get a certain amount of money per student. There are a number of grants that come out based on where people are, socioeconomic, et cetera. There's another adjustment in November, I believe it is, and that's our budget. That's what we work with. So when the funding announcement comes out sometime in February, then we sit down as a school division and sort out what that means. We know what the numbers are per student, then we figure that out, what that means for each school in terms of staffing, etc. What do we have? There's special needs funding that comes out. That's block funding, so we look at that. We have to work with that. So all those pieces fall into place. And then school divisions can set their levy to make up the difference, and some school divisions will raise taxes more than others.
Consider this example based on the school discussed by Ken's source. On September 30th, a school reports an enrollment of 350 students to the division. This figure determines funding allocations, resulting in approximately $5.5 million for staffing and operations. However, based on school staff observations and community reports, attendance begins to drop shortly after. By spring, only 100 students are attending regularly. Staffing levels remain unchanged despite the dramatic decline. In this example, that would mean 250 students are effectively unaccounted for. Some argue that, in theory, a school in this position could face a funding clawback, potentially losing nearly $4 million. Yet, in practice, the funding remains. This raises further questions. Have schools come to expect attrition? Is student outreach built into school strategy? What if it became a standard requirement?
You can't even begin to think about the implications of all those years where schools were so fully funded, but so completely empty. Just imagine what you could do with that money. Imagine what kind of outreach could have happened. Imagine what kind of community initiatives could have taken place to reach kids that were completely lost. But instead, we opted for empty classrooms and empty promises, a failure to deliver. We had the brightest minds around the table and we really did nothing. I think if we could see beyond a 4-year political cycle and really look at the kids who are being impacted by this, we could develop strategies that saw beyond the school, that looked into the community, that looked into homes. I think that there's opportunity for us to innovate here, because I'm convinced we can solve this problem, but we really just need to start thinking about different ways to spend money related to education so that we can have maximum impact on kids in our community. So we have this long-standing problem hidden in plain view. Educators know about it, everybody knows about it, so things started to become normalized. I had a student from our community tell me that a teacher had told him he was glad the class was down from 24 to 12 students because now they had the 12 committed students. And the student, as he told me, just sort of thought it was kind of sad. And he could see that something was wrong.
In schools with high absenteeism, creativity and innovation often appear under-resourced. In the earlier example, teaching staff levels exceeded what student attendance would require. Resources continued to support traditional instruction, but little was invested in reaching disconnected students. It's possible that some education departments have come to accept that a portion of students will not complete their education. Over time, even dedicated educators may begin to internalize this expectation. The consequence is profound. Countless young people fall through the cracks.
So some might say that it's outside of the purview of the school to do outreach to students who are missing. If that's truly the case, then those schools should be defunded by 71%. I don't want to see schools defunded, but it's a dark irony that schools are unwilling to lay staff off, but very willing to see students miss out on an education for their failure to do outreach. This is literally the choice they're making. When an organization ceases to exist for the people they were called to serve, that organization begins to die.
By the numbers, the loss of 250 students represents nearly $4 million in annual funding. That funding is not reduced as attendance declines. And historically, there have been few mechanisms to reallocate those funds to support reconnection efforts. But what if we did? Imagine taking 80% of the prior year's attrition-related funding, roughly $3 million, and investing it in outreach staff. At a cost of $65,000 per staff member, that could mean hiring up to 46 outreach workers in a single school.
We're funding school divisions to teach kids that aren't there. Maybe we have to look at the hard facts that we need money to hire people to go into those homes and get those kids to go to school. Perhaps we need to say, we know these kids, they're going to have a smaller population. We're going to fund outreach workers with money that presently is going to teachers that are teaching very small classes. I had one teacher who asked me, what should I do? I've got 24 kids registered and only 5 kids showed up yesterday. Taking that money and investing that into skilled, culturally appropriate staff that can go into the homes, and as the kids go back into school, we don't need the outreach workers, let's put that money back into teachers again. It's a very difficult concept, but I think it needs to be addressed, because one of the reasons that the politicians don't know what to do about kids who are staying home is they don't know where to get the money to pay somebody to help get those kids from the home to the school.
I think if we look at something as simple as the effects of absenteeism on our economy, we know that students who don't graduate high school are more likely to access government assistance or be involved in the justice system or child welfare agencies. And so there's a monetary cost that absenteeism has on locally our communities and our provinces in general. If we want to look at EIA, for example, it costs the province just over $10,000 to provide a single person with funds for a year. So if conservatively we say that across the province 1,000 students don't graduate this year, that's just over $10 million that is costing the province to pay out social assistance. On the flip side, though, if those same group of 1,000 students were to graduate, they're more likely to find employment or pursue post-secondary education. And so even if we think about if they get full-time jobs at minimum wage, that's over $30 million streamed back into the economy. It generates taxes for the province. There is skilled labor. There's communities that get to thrive and benefit from that. And for individuals, it helps end cycles of poverty. I think that if we had the funds, we could better engage some of these grassroots organizations to be able to work a little bit more closely with students and families who are experiencing absenteeism, whether that's in outreach, whether that is providing wraparound supports that schools may not have capacity to provide. I think that there's opportunity for the community to come alongside this issue and really help address some of those mental health or family dynamics or social aspects that are providing those barriers to education for students.
Roughly 3 years into the provincial task force, the government offered Inner City Youth Alive $100,000 to launch an initiative. We were very excited, but then COVID hit and they pulled the funding and we were back at this place. We were at a moral crossroad. I felt it was just so important that somebody do something. So far, we'd studied the problem, we'd done a marketing campaign about the problem, but nobody was willing to put boots on the ground. And so everything was telling us that this was an impossible assignment, but we thought, we have to do it. Somebody has to actually get out there first and work on strategies and be the pilot project, be the guinea pigs, the people who actually took a chance to work on the issue frontline and directly in the community. So that's what we did. We launched Engage Education. No one in all of Canada, to our knowledge, had ever tried. We were going to be the people out in the community, knocking on doors, reaching out, trying anything.
Inner City Youth Alive had never taken on an initiative of this scale. In its first year, the focus was on action research. Staff were encouraged to test approaches, learn from setbacks, and refine strategies that could begin to address the issue at its root.
So in 2021, we began piloting the Engage Education project to combat absenteeism here in the North End, because we saw that the concentration of absenteeism was very high in our communities. And so in our first year, we were only able to engage about 40% of students. And so in the social services world, 40% is pretty high when you're dealing with hybrid individuals. But after learning and researching what it is our students actually needed in order to be successful, we created a phased approach to reintegration that involves some scaffolding in terms of interventions. And so after that second year, we were able to increase that number to 62%. So 62% of students in the Engage Education program were attending school more than half the time. In our third year, we were really able to focus in on the needs of the student and, again, the level of intervention that we had. And so that number climbed up to 72%. And so what we're doing in terms of assessing a student's need, providing them safety and relationship, looking at all of the barriers that might prevent them from attending school, or what can the student handle in a phased way. It requires the school to be able to come alongside and recognize that these things take time. There's confidence that needs to be built in the student. There's some safety and trust issues that a student might have with the education system that need to be addressed first. And so we can do all of this work on the front end in terms of having a student feel comfortable with the idea of school, or a willingness to go back into the classroom, but it really depends on the school's collaboration to be able to provide that safe environment for a student to go back into. So in the last 3 years, our small team of 2 have engaged 80 students in the community, 73% of whom are now attending school regularly. And if we as a small team are able to help students in that small capacity, just imagine what's possible for the thousands of students that are experiencing severe chronic absenteeism or completely disengaged from school. So something we've learned along the way is that there is this ideal ratio between staff members and students that is perfect for being able to cultivate meaningful relationships, but also ensure that we're reaching a large number of students. And so that's 1 staff member to every 25 students.
Using that ratio as a basis, the school in our earlier example might need as few as 10 outreach staff to engage missing students.
But we needed a little more to happen than just activating 10 staff in that school. We needed schools to develop reintegration strategies, a space for students who have been lost from education, been out there in the community, staff who are equipped to welcome those individuals, and a slow phase-in reintegration strategy to get those students back in the classrooms and fully functioning. A student that shows up in January still should have a chance to be able to reintegrate into the classroom and have a place where they feel welcomed and a chance to succeed.
What are the obstacles that are keeping these children from coming to school? We need to figure that out. We make a lot of assumptions, but we need to ask them. We need to ask those parents. We need to have those conversations. We need to find out. And then we need to, in a very intentional way, eliminate those obstacles. When I was on the attendance task force, there was a pilot project that we did in one of the northern communities. And so we hired somebody locally who could speak the language, somebody who, when they showed up at the door, wasn't a stranger, so that they were allowed to come into the house. Because not everybody's comfortable with inviting people into the house. And that person could speak the language, knew the family, and started to talk to them about school and helping them overcome the obstacles that they had, whatever they were, to help their children get to school on a daily basis. That person worked with 2 families. It was magnificent. They went from 20% attendance to 85, almost overnight. But there it was. There it was, community, somebody from community working with a family that made all the difference. Just made all the difference.
We tend to have families reaching out, friends of kids that attend our drop-ins, and they're struggling with so many different things. It could be anxiety, could be just having to help out at home, just nobody to wake them up in the mornings. It varies from child to child. So it's pretty frustrating when I work hard to build those relationships with the kids and get them back into school. And at the end of the day, I get them to school. It could be a 2-week process. It could be a 3-month to 6-month process. We don't know. It is all based on the kids. And then I get to the school, I bring them there, and they're like, well, we don't know what to do because we can't fit them in this class. This class is full, or they're not with this grade, so we don't have room here, or whatever it is at that time, to make an excuse for those kids to not come. I feel like it's really discouraging, not only for myself, but for the kids. When we go to the school, I find that it's me and the student are both very much on the same page. We know what they can handle, we have a whole plan and everything. Sometimes it's like they can go for 1 hour a day, and that's just a start for a week or so. But the schools, we get there and they're like, no, we can't have you here for just 1 hour. Disheartening, really. There's no understanding. The schools do not take kids usually past November, but sometimes we get lucky and we're able to get a child in for 2nd semester, but it's really based on what the child is able to bring to the table. They're not so eager to jump on board and welcome a kid that's just going to take 1 class versus a child that's there all year doing the full schedule. I feel like they want to have this image of like everybody doing what they need to do when they're in the building, that they're forgetting that the most important part is getting them to graduate. They have to be open and willing to take the baby steps. They have to have a plan, a reintegration plan. They have to be willing to work with everybody in that child circle. They need to talk to the families. They need to talk to the child. The child needs to have the options and feel like they are in control of something in their educational journey. And then I feel like they would get the best results.
Operating a division as large as Winnipeg School Division requires policies and procedures. But when those policies unintentionally leave vulnerable students behind, it's worth reevaluating the balance. A single no to a returning student can have a lasting impact. Every missed day is a lost opportunity. We must care enough to revise our systems with equity in mind. We now understand the contours of the problem and how funding flows. We've looked at this from the perspective of taxpayers and educators, but perhaps most importantly, we must consider what it means for the students.
But if there's that many missing children, there's something going on under there that's not supposed to be happening. Those are relationships that are absolutely failing, that are just completely gone within their life, that they just can't do it anymore. Because to have no relationships is to have no support whatsoever. People with no support are not going to go anywhere. Personal relationships within schools, regardless if it's just friends, being able to encourage you to come, or being close with your teachers, or could even be the janitor, I don't know, anybody. It's about giving you the peace of mind that you're not going to be there alone, that you have people on your side.
There isn't a single kid that's been successful in school that doesn't have a teacher that they can talk about that's had a good relationship. And most of them have one, some of them have two, but those that have one don't remember the other teachers. It's that relationship that they remember. So when we get our knickers in a knot over ELA marks and mathematic marks, let's build a society that cares for each other. Let's get community involved. People in community know their families. They know who's living where. They know whose kids belong to where. There's got to be people that are willing to help us and work with us. Let's be creative in our solutions.
After 2 years of being out of school, I woke up one afternoon and my parents called me down. And when I went downstairs to open the door, I saw an engaged member. When they reached out to me, I didn't really think anyone else cared that I really wanted to go to school. Because most people just told me and I would be like, okay, and they never asked about it again. But the engaged members, they pushed me and they motivated me. They were talking to me about going back to school, and something about her wanting to help me just motivated me to go back. Getting to know all the staff members of Engage is actually quite motivating and thrilling, because then you have that person to talk to. Since I started going to school more and more, I've been encouraging my friends to go more, which helped them. And by me continuing to go to school, my family also is pretty motivated to go to school. What Engage has taught me or motivated me to do was to go to school more and to graduate ever since I went on a tour to the University of Manitoba for the first time. It motivated me to push harder and graduate. What inspired me was the way it looked, the buildings and all the arts. And so when I looked into more of university, it looked pretty thrilling. I want to graduate by next year and be able to go to Red River College or the University of Manitoba to do graphic arts and designing.
Now, I've heard it somewhere said, and I'm sure it's been said many times, that education is the new buffalo, meaning that, obviously back in our traditional days, our cultures, our groups, our tribes couldn't live or thrive without having a buffalo for clothing, medicine, food, etc., etc. These days, somebody can't thrive if they don't have a good education, and you can't have a good education if you don't attend school. And Indigenous peoples, we have a lower education rate, so I'd like to see our people thrive currently, but also into the future. So having our peoples go to school, get an education is absolutely essential.
Education is very important. It's something that I know I need, but it's not just that I need it, it's that I want it. That I want to be able to go higher than where I am currently in life. I want to be able to go to college. I want to be able to study journalism, even not if I don't need that, if I don't want that. Moving forward, I would like to do something with the community and children.
What's happening for these kids in school, we can make a difference in their future. In our community, so often you're going to use the analogy of a bunch of community workers pulling people out of a stream who are drowning and who are just going down maybe for the last time. And so I feel like it's time that we go upstream and find out where they're falling in. Find out what's throwing them in. Find out what the factors are so we can prevent this and we can start to work earlier on and do less sort of intervention and more prevention.
These kids are worth it, and they're our future, and that is for every child in the whole world. If we don't invest in what's important to them, how are they ever going to be successful in the future? So we really just have to build them up and take the steps with them so that they know that the hard stuff matters and that they can do it.
When I finally graduated and I'm walking down the aisle and I'm hearing the cheering and the people are looking up at me, and it just, the emotion overwhelms you and you just feel so accomplished, so fulfilled. Best feeling in the world. How you look yourself in the mirror changes so much when you make that next goal and you accomplish that goal, and gives them that desire to move mountains, because you just never know what a kid is going to accomplish when they feel that awesome, I'm a hero, I'm the best, and it's just a flower that blooms, and it's beautiful, and that's what everybody wants in a child, is just for them to bloom.
The story of education in Manitoba is largely one of hope. For many, school is the gateway to a brighter future. But for others, this has not been the case. As we reflect on this truth, we must take a moment to grieve what has been lost, to honor the lives of the youth who missed out, and to celebrate those who, despite all odds, continue to press forward into their best story.